Hello and welcome to another episode of The Sovereign Room. I'm your host, Sarah Elsherbeni, Naturopathic Doctor, Feminine Embodiment Guide, and Somatic Facilitator. This is your space to come home to your body, reclaim your voice, and heal the nervous system patterns keeping you in survival mode, so you can trust yourself again, feel safe in your own skin, and lead your life, relationships, and business from sovereignty instead of self-abandonment. I am so excited you're here. Come sit with me inside the Sovereign Room. Well, hello, you guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Sovereign Room. Okay, so I have been thinking about this really weird part of coming back to yourself, this self-return where you finally start choosing yourself, but you also realize you don't really know who you are. And I don't mean this in a catastrophic, dramatic way of oh my gosh, I don't know who the fuck I am kind of situation. No, I just mean when you've spent so much of your life being who everyone else needed you to be, there's this moment where you're like, wait, pause. What do I actually like? What makes me happy? What do I value? What do I want? What kind of relationships actually genuinely feel good to me? What kind of life am I building if I'm finally not building it around somebody else's approval? And I think this happens because as women, we consistently take care of everyone else. We become what everyone else expects of us. So we carry all of these different titles, right? The daughter, mother, student, best friend, partner, practitioner, the good girl, the helper, or the one who holds it all together. What I call a high capacity woman. And then there are all the expectations that come with all of these different titles. The societal expectations, religious expectations, cultural, family, the expectations of who you are supposed to be as a woman. There are so many expectations on how to be as a woman. And I'm actually currently going through that as I've graduated and become this doctor. Now there's this expectation being imposed on me, mostly by family, on how I should be acting now, whether that's on social media or in person or how I'm supposed to dress all of a sudden because I'm this doctor now. And I'm like, wait, since when? Again, because we go through life being who everyone else wants us to be. Society imposes on us as well of who we are supposed to be, what we are supposed to look like, what we're supposed to do, the whole go to college, get a degree, get married, have kids, this whole timeline of expectations. And when we finally get to a point where it's time to reclaim our own sovereignty, you're now in this liminal space where we don't know who we are and what we want. That is the part I want to talk about today, because coming back home to ourselves, this self-return is not just about choosing yourself once. It's not you waking up and be like, okay, I'm choosing myself today and that's it. Good. No, it's choosing yourself consistently every time, because now it's learning about how to be in a relationship with yourself again. It's learning about your likes and dislikes, what your values are when it comes to relationships, collaborations, friendships, business, all of these different things. It's learning about what your dreams are, what brings you joy, what your needs, what is your truth. It's almost like you're going on a date with yourself again and asking, who are you? How beautiful and sexy does that feel to just go on a date with yourself and get to know you again? That's what it's like. That is the art of getting to know yourself again. So I think that the reason this feels so confusing for a lot of us is because, again, we were conditioned to ask for approval before we were ever taught how to ask ourselves what we wanted. So if you've been a people pleaser, or if you've lived a life where someone else told you what you needed to do, how to do it, and what your life had to look like, choosing yourself can feel very foreign, and it can feel a bit jarring to our nervous system, where you're now in this place where you get to call the shots and make the decisions. And you're like, wait, who can I ask to be like, is this okay? What do you think about this? Because you're still asking, is this okay? Am I allowed to do this? Can I choose this? Am I allowed to actually disappoint someone by saying no? Am I allowed to do this in my own way? oh my goodness, right? You might be struggling with what you want to do and how you want to do it without someone else there validating it for you because you've done it for so long in your life. And without someone else telling you how to do it, or without someone else being there to tell you, yeah, you're just like, it can feel heavy on us because we're learning how to trust our own voice again, our own intuition after years of being told what our life should look like, what we should be doing, how we should dress, how we should speak, how we should act. Everything from start to finish, we've been told what to do. And this can show up in our life in so many ways. Like when I was 28, I started my life over, basically. I spent a big chunk of my life, 12 years to be exact, with someone. And I was in a relationship for 12 years. And then I got engaged, and we were engaged for 6 months before I was like, nah, we aren't doing this. Sorry. And then I broke off the engagement. And I lost myself in that by dating somebody because my whole life revolved around somebody else, and I was taking care of somebody else, and I was trying to please somebody else. And I overrode my own compass, my own intuition, what my body was telling me, what I felt, because we have this preconceived idea, I would say, where when you're in a relationship, especially if you're from a cultural background too, is that there's this submissive aspect that as a woman, you are submissive to a man. And so you're like, you have to listen to him. And so when you spend so much of your life doing that, building your life around someone else, dating someone, and then losing yourself in a relationship without even realizing it, you kind of start your life over once you're done. I was 28 when I broke this off. I had just moved to Oregon. I was 6 months into my doctorate program, my naturopathic doctor program, and I realized that this was just not it. And then after you leave that relationship or a particular season in your life and you start this new life just with yourself, and it's not just necessarily starting over in the sense of like, oh, I'm single, so I'm starting over. Like, yes, there's an aspect to that. And also, like, it's just starting over with you, yourself, and I. And you're getting to know who you are again. And there's this moment where you're like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what my likes are, my dislikes. I don't know who I am outside of this relationship, outside of being chosen, outside of considering someone else first. And so people ask a lot of simple questions. People ask you these simple questions of like, what makes you happy? What brings you joy? And you don't know how to answer because you've spent such a big chunk of your life bringing happiness to other people instead of asking what happiness feels like to you. It's a wild concept to finally choose things that actually make you happy. And in that same breath, it can feel liberating, but also feel like you're doing something wrong. And your nervous system is constantly braced for impact because it's like, whoa, we have too much control, girl, which is wild because depending on the aspect, right, we want control. But then also when we have too much control, it's like, whoa, this feels a little risque. Like, I shouldn't have this much control. Like, I don't have to ask anyone else if this is okay. I don't have to get approval. I can just choose this. But then you have this shame that comes up, right? The shame of like, is this allowed? Is this okay? Am I being selfish? Like, am I falling behind? Am I failing? Did I mess up the life that I'm supposed to have? This is the part that I think we need to talk about more. Because sometimes choosing yourself brings up a sense of failure and shame in the same breath. You know that you're choosing yourself and you know that you're reclaiming your life. You're trying to come back to yourself. So there's this ebb and flow because some days you feel free and then some days you feel like, oh my God, I get to choose. And other days you are grieving the life that you could have potentially had. And I don't think we talk a lot about the grief that we can experience by grieving a life that you've envisioned, a life that you potentially could have had. Even if it's not the one you actually wanted, even if it's not aligned and you knew that. and your body knew that it couldn't stay there, you can still grieve the potential. You can still grieve the timeline. The version of you who thought life was going to look a certain way. And then you look at everyone else's life and path, and then the comparison starts to kick in. Everyone else seems to be getting married, having kids, building careers, buying houses, following the path, and you're over here choosing yourself, but somehow it can feel like freedom and failure at the same time because we've been conditioned that life should look a certain way. And so in that same aspect, you're grieving the life that you could have potentially had, even if deep down you knew that it's not the one life that you wanted. And you're allowed to. And that is such a real part of this liminal space. You are no longer who you are, but you do not quite fully know who you are becoming just yet. And what I see differently now, it's allowed me to see this in a different lens. This whole journey was really about me getting to know myself again. Everything happened in the right timing and in the way that it needed to happen. But I did not understand it while I was in the thick of it. When I was in it, I was like, why is this happening to me? Why am I going through this? Why do I have to feel all of this? Why was I chosen for this battle? But like looking back, I can see that as a practitioner, as a facilitator, and as someone who's going to help other people, I had to understand my own body. I had to understand my own emotions, my own tendencies, my own patterns, the ways that I abandoned myself, the ways that I people pleased, the ways that I looked for approval, or the ways that I overrode my body and what it was telling me. I had to know who I was before I could step forward and help other people. And I want to be very clear with this, okay? Because this is completely different than me saying that you have to be fully healed before you help people. Because I used to think that way. Like, who am I to help somebody else if I'm not fully healed? If I'm still struggling with my daddy issues? If I'm still struggling with the masculine energy? If I'm still angry? Who am I to be able to help somebody else with love and relationships if I don't even have that right now? It's interesting because I used to think that. And I used to think that if I'm not fully healed, who am I to help somebody else? If I'm dealing with certain, patterns, who am I to be able to hold space for other people? If I'm still learning, does that mean that I can't support other people? And I've learned that that's not true. Because of these thought processes, a lot of times we get stuck in getting certificate. We get stuck in chasing certifications and accolades and all of these different things because it's like, oh, I'm still learning, so I can't support people until I have this degree, I have this certificate, and I have that. Or like, if I want to help women heal and come back to themselves, well, I can't do that until I'm fully healed and I have no more problems to help. Girl, healing, there is no end journey. There's just ebbs and flows. It's not a linear process. And you don't need to be fully healed to be able to help somebody. And that's kind of what I've learned through that is that you don't have to be fully healed to help people, but you do have to be honest and you do have to be aware and you do have to be responsible of what is yours versus what is not. And ultimately, I was learning about my body before I could help other people with their bodies. I was learning how to listen to myself and my body and what it was telling me and how it communicated with me before I could support other women in listening to their bodies and themselves and grieving the old parts of myself, the old versions, grieving the life that I'm no longer living, grieving the things that I've gone through has helped me become a better practitioner, facilitator, mentor, and future doctor. Not because suffering is required. Let me just talk about that. Okay. You don't need to have a cathartic life and be actually suffering in order to get to this point. And I think a lot of us on healing journeys and trying to be better is that when we go through these journeys with ourselves, we think that we need to be suffering and it needs to be cathartic in order for it to be good. And it doesn't. But because now I understand the body differently in a different lens, I understand emotions differently. I understand what it feels like to lose yourself and have to come back. And I think a lot of us get stuck in over analyzing our patterns so that we constantly live in the what ifs. What if I did this differently? What if I said something else? What if I stayed? What if I left sooner? What if I chose differently? What if I wasted time? And then we keep beating ourselves up because we keep making these mistakes, or because we think we made mistakes, even though you probably really didn't, or because we look back at things that we've said, things that we've did, or things that we wish we could hit the rewind button on and do differently. And we let ourselves constantly live in the past. We let ourselves succumb to our past or our circumstances. And I get it. I get it because I was there. I was complaining, constantly complaining about the way I was raised, or if I was raised differently, or my religion, my culture, the expectations, my parents, right? Like, if only things were different, was the constant complaining that we do in our mind and that I've done. And there is validity in naming these things, the things that we need to acknowledge, the things that we need to grieve, and the things that we get to be honest about. But at some point in this journey, we also have to step outside of constantly living only in victimhood, because our parents, they did the best they could with what they knew. That does not mean that everything was okay. It does not mean that everything gets excused, but it does help us find some gratitude instead of only frustration or anger, because that's kind of what I'm moving through. It helps us say that, okay, this happened, it shaped me, it hurt me, and it taught me something. And now what? Who do I want to be now? What do I want to do with this experience? What can I alchemize? The art of alchemy, alchemizing this into something else. And this is something that actually came up for me in an acupuncture session about 3 weeks or so ago, where I had this breakthrough around anger. And anger is a very prominent emotion in my life that I've been working with for the last couple years, maybe. And I realized that as women, a lot of us were not allowed to be angry. Angry was not a suitable emotion for us to feel. And if we expressed anger, it made us bad. It made us disrespectful, ungrateful. It made us too much, and it made us difficult. And so we had to find something else to do with it. And so if you did not feel safe expressing your anger, you had to feel something else, find something else safer to feel. And so in my case, in part of this breakthrough that I had, was that I realized sometimes it felt easier for me to be depressed than be angry. Because if I was depressed, maybe somebody would finally take care of me. Maybe someone would finally see me. Maybe someone would finally hold me. But anger felt dangerous. I wasn't allowed to feel that. Because if I felt angry, I would be punished, I'd be rejected, I'd be the bad girl. And that was such a huge, big realization for myself. Because sometimes, let's be honest, we find pleasure in the struggle. Not because we consciously want to stay stuck, but because we want people to see us. We want people to take care of us. We want people to finally notice that we're hurting. And sometimes we stay in this victim place because we're searching for someone else to hold us. But part of the work is realizing that you won't hold yourself. So you search for someone else to hold you. You are waiting for someone else to see you, but you are refusing to see yourself. And that is hard to admit. That was very hard to admit, because as someone, or anyone for that matter, but as someone who has struggled with their mental health, who has struggled with self-medication and substances and things like that, it can be challenging to sit with yourself when you're feeling some kind of way, when you're feeling emotions, or let's say you are feeling depressed or you're angry, to tell yourself to go sit with your thoughts and sit with your emotions and sit with what you're feeling and process that can be scary. Because in a society that has demonized mental health in that way, where it's like, if you are overreacting, if you are feeling too much, you're given this medication and there's no plan after that. I do see a time and place for medications to help you get through things when things are too charged and alive for you in that moment. But the gap I'm seeing is that there is no plan. There is no plan. So it's like you take this medication, you numb yourself, and you don't get to process through and understand a lot of these things. And so I get it. I get it. It can be scary to sit with your thoughts and your emotions. And it's hard to admit that because it's scary, but it can also be freeing because part of getting to know yourself again is learning to ask yourself, what am I actually feeling? Like, is this depression or is this anger? Or is it grief? Or is it resentment? Or is it actually fear? What emotion was I never allowed to feel? And where am I waiting for someone else to hold something that I have not learned how to hold in myself? We are so scared to see ourselves. We want other people to see because intimacy is scary. Intimacy is scary. Into me, I see. We cannot have other people see us if we are not willing to see ourselves. And so you create this intimacy with yourself. And one practice that has absolutely helped me with creating this sort of like intimacy with myself is emotional fluidity. Emotional fluidity is a practice where you experience a wide range of emotions: anger, peace, harmony, confusion, hysteria, all of it. Euphoria, all the different types of emotions, right? And as the name suggests, you are fluidly moving from one emotion to the other. So maybe you feel anger for a minute or two. It's a whole long practice, basically, where you can move through the spectrum of all of these emotions. But basically, like, for example, you spend a minute in anger and a particular process through that, and then you fluid over into peace, and then you allow yourself to feel peace, because this is honestly the missing gap that I see in a lot of mental health care, in my opinion. When we are experiencing these different variations of emotions, we shame feeling these emotions. And so with emotional fluidity, specifically for this, you can do the full practice, but also after doing this full practice, you can come back to this practice and go through specific emotions. So specifically for the practice that I'm going to share with you guys today is anger. And so what I like to do, this can be like super simple. I know it probably sounds really intense, but I promise you it's really simple. Like, all you need is like a pillow, and it can be punching a pillow, screaming in a pillow, shaking, stomping, whatever. And you're putting like an angry song on and allowing the emotion to move through your body in the safety of your own home or room. Because emotions at the end of the day are just energy in motion. So this is why I think emotional fluidity is so important for us. Any emotion that we allow ourselves to feel for a given amount of time can move. And it does not have to be your entire identity. It does not have to take over your full day, but it can be felt, expressed, and moved. So for me, and the practice that I'm sharing with you guys, is that I usually do like a 10-minute practice with an angry song. You can find an angry, angsty song that really gets you pumping there. It can be a good Papa Roach song. That's the one that I have that I use. But you put on this song, right? But I go into this practice with something specific, a specific trauma that I'm working through, a specific experience, a conversation, something that happened, maybe something that I'm processing through a past relationship, someone that hurt me, somewhere where I swallowed my anger, somewhere where I felt like somebody did me wrong, right? Things like that. I highly, highly would recommend starting with a smaller scale unless you are working with a practitioner. I would not go into this process and this practice with a big trauma, like a big T trauma, if you are doing this alone. And if you have not held yourself through a type of practice like this, especially if you're new to this, do not start with a big T trauma unless you're doing it with a practitioner that can be there to hold that space for you and be able to pull you out in case it gets too much for you. But eventually you kind of get to a point after doing this practice for a while where you do feel confident enough in being able to hold yourself through a practice like that, where you can eventually do bigger T traumas. But please do not go into this practice with a really big activating trauma if you don't have someone there with you that can hold the space and be able to pull you out of it if it gets a little much and a little activating. So start with something that your body can process, and for 3 to 4 minutes, turn on whatever song it is that you like. for the sake of this example, we're going to put on some Papa Roach and go in and allow yourself to feel the emotion of that particular moment that you decided to work through or a particular situation. And when you're going into this, you're allowing your body to express it, to move it, and actually say what you did not get to say, which is super liberating to be able to go into this practice and finally say what you wanted to say. And you'll do that for like 3 to 4 minutes. Usually the song is about 3 to 4 minutes. So you're during that 3 to 4 minutes, you're allowing your body and your mind to really process and feel this anger of that particular experience or situation. And after that, then you kind of come back and you take some breaths. And usually I have like a more lighter note song that comes after it. And I allow my body to kind of just land. I put my hand on my heart or my womb or my abdomen, wherever, drink some water, and I allow my body to settle for another 3 to 4 minutes with that next song and just allowing my body to process what I just went through and what I expressed and kind of see if there's any messages that usually come through after that, even during and before and after. But allow your body to settle for a few minutes after that. The point of this practice is not to spiral. The point is to give the emotion somewhere safe to go instead of bottling it and storing it in the body. So, one invitation that I do want to give you is this. Again, this was something that I learned from my acupuncturist through my breakthrough is that anytime you're feeling depressed or numb or anxious or some kind of way, I want you to pause before you automatically label it. It's so easy for us when we're feeling off to be like, oh, I'm depressed or I'm angry or I'm anxious. And it's not to say that you probably are feeling those kind of things, but I invite you to ask yourself, like, am I actually depressed or am I angry? Am I actually numb or am I just feeling very overwhelmed? Am I actually fine or am I actually feeling resentful about something? What is this feeling? What is coming up for me? What emotion might be underneath this? And then sit with that discomfort. And so I invite yourself into a conversation with yourself. Set aside some intimacy time. Into me, I see. Have a conversation with yourself. And so usually I love to, this is what I have like, so what I usually love to do is a somatic dialogue. And so any of the questions that we talked about today, a particular emotion or like fear, for example, right? If you're feeling fear about a certain situation or thing that you're going to do and you feel that fear in your body, I invite you to kind of go through like a little meditation conversation with yourself where you just kind of close your eyes, take a few deep breaths to kind of ground yourself into the space, and then kind of have that conversation with yourself like, okay, I'm feeling this kind of fear about this particular situation or whatever. Why am I feeling this fear? Where is it coming from? And usually allowing yourself to kind of like process that and tap into your mind and body and be like, oh, wait, I was 16 when I first felt this type of fear before. What happened then? Why was I feeling that? This happened. And having this, it's kind of like reparenting in a way, but it's more of a somatic dialogue of like talking with your mind and your body and allowing your body and mind to communicate with you and like, okay, I'm feeling this fear, but where is it coming from? Where did it originally start? And allowing yourself to kind of like process that. So again, you don't have to fix it immediately. You don't have to know the perfect answer. You don't have to make meaning of it right away. It's just start by asking questions. And a lot of the questions that I usually ask is just like, what is coming up for me? What am I feeling? What do I actually need right now? And then from there, keep getting to know yourself by asking questions. What do I like? So, really great, like somatic dialogue for this is like maybe meeting your younger child, your inner child before all of this and getting to know her, asking her, like, what do I like? What do I dislike? What actually brings me joy? What makes me happy? What kind of relationships do I want? What friendships make me feel safe? What kind of, collaborations feel good to me? What dreams are actually mine? What values are mine? Or what values did I inherit from someone else because they said it was good or it sounded good or whatever? What am I still asking permission for? That is the art of getting to know yourself again. Not having all the answers, but willing to ask yourself the questions. And The truth I want to leave you all with is that emotions are nothing but energy in motion. And when in doubt, when you are feeling some kind of way, get up and move. Move your body, whether that's walking, shaking, dancing, crying, punching a pillow, screaming in a pillow. Let your body speak. Because sometimes you do not need to intellectualize your feelings. You don't need to think your way back to yourself. Sometimes you just need to feel your way back to yourself. Getting to know yourself again is not about finding this one final version of you. It's about building a relationship with yourself, a relationship where you get to keep asking, who am I now? What do I need now? What is true for me now? And what do I want now? That, to me, is part of sovereignty. This is reclaiming sovereignty. Thank you all for joining me for this conversation. I hope you guys got tons of value from this. I'm super excited to bring this conversation to you all. And thank you for being a part of this space. And until next time, I will see you guys next week. Thank you for tuning into another episode of The Sovereign Room. If this conversation gave you language, permission, or even one big deep exhale, share it with a woman in your life who is also learning how to come home to herself. And if you haven't already, follow the podcast, leave a rating, and subscribe so more women can find their way into this room. New episodes drop every Wednesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep coming home to your body, your voice, and yourself.